Thank you so much, Zeeshan. And as you say, we'll now open the floor for questions and answer session. Please raise your hand if you have a question, or alternatively write it in the chat box. I'm having some issues opening the chat box, so maybe if Zeeshan can just keep an eye on that in case there are some questions in there. Before I go to Uma's question, I'm just going to kick things off, if I may. One of your recommendations is that smaller countries should raise their voice for the international rules-based order, which of course I completely agree with. But as you mentioned, the events of today kind of call into question the commitment of powerful Western countries to this order, as well as the commitment of non-Western countries, as you mentioned, like Russia and China. But in the context of South Asia, obviously, we see human rights abuses and issues with political systems. So I kind of wanted to play devil's advocate and ask, can anyone legitimately champion, the international rules-based order at the moment? Sorry, Zeeshan, that was aimed at you. If you're happy to
No,
answer that.
I couldn't understand your question. Can you please repeat that? So you were asking whether in South Asia there is any country which could be the champion of human rights, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of saying, or is, with in the context of the Western and non-Western countries as well, because of the lack of commitment that they've shown, and also the issues internally within countries themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was one example. I mean, India. It means it was a liberal democracy, but with the passage of time, India's commitment to liberal democracy is declining. So actually, in South Asia, there's no a single, you can say, the country which you could say that they have very good level of the political freedom and also the economic freedom. So the South Asia on average is at the hybrid regime, you can say the region. So the political freedom is compromised. And also you would be surprised to know that means that South Asia is highly protective as well. So they are very, very lower level of like the globalized in that way. So they are in protecting their industries. For example, Pakistan is at the least level seventh, highly protective, like you can say that country in terms of the trade. And the similar is India. You would be surprised, even though the India is going to become like a major part in the global economy, but still India is very protective to its economy and all other small countries as well. So there is no a good example in South Asia. We could say that the other countries should learn from it. And that's also the misery because in the political and economic freedom literature, we study that like the neighboring countries learn from each other. So if there is not a good neighboring country, so it means that all the countries are trying to copy each other in terms of human rights violation, and that's a very bad thing.
Thank you so much for that response. So Uma, if you're happy to unmute yourself and ask your question for Zeeshan.
Thank you, Dr. Zeeshan. As always, it was very convincing, argumentative presentation, and the data that you throw at all of us is amazing, astounding as always. I would obviously nobody can contest the validity of the data, so there is nothing much that we can talk about based upon the data. But I would draw upon Dr. Mary's question, and to extend it a bit further, I'd like to go into the basics of the previous world order, the demise of which we are bemoaning, or the expected demise of which we are talking about. So you mentioned the features of the previous old world order as sovereignty, human rights, and peaceful conflict resolution and free trade. And I somehow feel that the first three of those, sovereignty, human rights, and peaceful conflict resolution, were never the principles or the ideals that were protected in the order at all. And even for free trade, uh, the free trade was a pill that was shoved down the throats of the poor countries or the developing countries. And it was free trade agreement was a privilege for the developed world, and not as much for the it was more binding, so to say, for the poor countries. So don't you think it was these weaknesses, these slogans? There was such a smoke screen about these slogans. They were never there. That order was so fragile in its idealism that it was bound to fall down. It was bound to crumble. There we talk of Greenland and Canada today, whose sovereignty or territorial integrity has not yet been violated. But there are abundant examples in the past 75 years since the end of this last uh, uh, World War, and when the old world order took hold of the world. Globalization, I found it, actually, please do not take offense, but about globalization, you use the word in all your charts, you use the word, it was benign. With my medical background, I we had two kinds of tumors, the benign and the malignant. So I thought there was a method to because you wanted to assert that globalization was a tumor, but it did not turn malignant for most of the world. So my question is, wasn't there in its essence, the old world order was so flimsy, it was more of a Ponzi scheme, that it had to crumble and it had to fall flat? Thank you.
You're welcome. Means that's interesting question. One thing is that like I'm in the foreign policy literature, or like you could say that international relations, I'm more the person who is in the middle of realism and idealism as well. And the world was also in the middle. As I showed you, the geopolitical risk level was very, very low. It was not my opinion. It's the data which explains. So the world was not ideal 100%, but it was like at least means at the global level, the world was more peaceful. And there were some violations from the rich, or you could say that the larger countries or powerful countries, but their numbers was very, very low. And also at the international level, they were being criticized as well. And they were accepting, like they were not saying that, okay, because I'm powerful, I could do anything. So the world was not 100% idealistic, but with compared to the all the time we lived on this planet, that was the best of the time in terms of the peace and in terms of the prosperity. One thing. The second thing is that as I showed you the data, it was not my personal opinion. I showed you the data that so the developing countries were more in advantage than the developed countries because of the globalization. And I showed you how they became richer and how their share in the global economy has increased. And you could also see that that's also making many populists in West very, very angry, like why this situation was happened. So this was also not my opinion. And the other hand, the situation could be opposite as well, because it's possible that, because I know that in the developing country, there has always been, according to some people, a narrative that so the world is not in favor. But if you look at still, if you look at the data, you would find out that the developing countries are highly, highly protective, and the developed countries, the Western developed countries, have been very, very open. So it's opposite. If globalization was kind of, you can say that the like a cancer, the tumor to the poor countries, the situation was opposite, and that's many people, the populists, they say that okay, we were very open in terms of the trade, in terms of the human rights and other things, but why the others were not so open? So still you feel like so the South Asia wants like the West should be open, but South Asia means doesn't want to be open for the countries who are in South Asia and for others to like you can say that trade with them. So, in my opinion, globalization was more in favor of globalization was in favor of everyone, but it's not the case that it was like a tumor for developing countries. And I showed you the data, and that data was not generated by me. So that's the data from the robust sources as well.
Thank you for that. I think that there was one question in the chat box that was asked earlier on, Zeeshan. I don't know if you're able to access that if you want to address that question.
Sure.
But otherwise, if anyone else has any questions, please do raise your hand.
Are not these the concept of the book Capitalism? I don't think so, that because that book is more about the inequality, which is like the micro level data and some other things. So geopolitics and all these things are not part of it. And also, according to the Thomas Piketty, it was more about, so the globalization was in favor of the rich people. So what I was talking, it was a bit quite opposite to him. Another question, I'm wondering if the South Asian banking crisis had any impact on the dynamics you discussed in the presentation. What is how it is related? Can you please explain the question? I couldn't get that. The Asian financial crisis was something different. It was like they were more open in terms of like the capital inflow. And with the passage of time, they realized that that policy was not working. So when they stopped capital inflow, so then there was a crisis at the in the Asian financial system. So that's totally different. That's not related to what I was saying.
No, obviously it's not related, but I'm wondering, you think that the effects of this crisis, which are clearly related to a lot of things that are in the background of what you've been discussing, I was just wondering if, in your opinion, there is any time of any kind of longer term effect, or because we know the systemic risk, when it materializes, it changes the dynamics of economic growth, of the dynamics that relate to the quality of life. There is a lot of impact, right? So I was wondering if this, as the aftermath, not directly the financial crisis obviously, but the aftermath of that, and how this affects societies. And since you're really more, I know there is a lot of impact in Europe, right? That's from the research that I do, and you know this to some extent, right? But I was wondering about Asia, because I have absolutely no expertise in that geographical area. So I was just wondering, there is clear impact on emerging countries in Europe, but what do you think about Asia? Or maybe there is a different dynamics, and that's very interesting as well. So.
Yeah, Martha, thanks explaining this question. Now I got it. So means after the Asian financial crisis, so the export-led growth model was changed. So before this crisis, the idea was that if, for example, the countries are globalized at the financial level as well, and the goods and exports sector as well, so that would be an advantage of them as well. So the developing countries were more in favor of the globalization, whether the globalization was export-led or also the capital. But after this crisis, so they got the message like, means if they are going to open at the level of the financial globalization, that would go against them. So that's why after this crisis, so China closed its financial sector at the global level, and means you can say East Asian economies, especially, still that the financial level they are not at globalized, because they feel like they couldn't face the systemic risk. This made you can say the mind of the developing countries that they are not safe in the globalized world, because just changing the geopolitical risk can reverse the capital into the rich countries. So then they close themselves in the financial markets, but in the export sector they remained open. But import, they were facing the same, you can say, the strategy, the growth model, which was Japan was following, and also like Germany was following, and also to some extent United States followed, is that until their economy is not rich, they should not open for the import. So they followed. So that's why The globalization was in terms of the West was more open in terms of the capital market. West was more open in terms of the import, and Asia was more open in terms of the export, but not in terms of import and also the financial market. So this created global financial or the capital imbalance as well. And that's also the logic populists are using everywhere, saying that, okay, the world has never been benign to us in that way. Yeah. I think that's the question, and I answered
yes.
it.
Thank you so much. Yes,
Yeah, you are welcome.
Thank you for that. And I think there have been 3 more questions in the chat. I think maybe we have time to address 2 of those. So Zeeshan, if you want to select whichever 2 that you'd like to reply to, or 3 if you think you have the time.
Yeah, I mean, I will go short then. So thank you, Muhammad Shafiq. Well done, Zeeshan. Can you think the conflict of economy is primarily connected with class and elite structure of politics? That's the micro level discussion, so we could talk another time. And I still don't feel like it's a class or elites problem. It's more about the geopolitical problem. That was the main topic of today's discussion. The question is that I had the same question that Mary did, but I was wondering more so about the timeline, whether it's seeming as though there is a crisis after crisis with developed nation ever focus on implementing a rule-based world order to aid small countries and so then one. Yeah, that's a problem. I mean, especially after the financial crisis 2008, we are facing the crisis after every five years or 6 years, and after the COVID, still the risk level for the companies is also very high because they're feeling like there could be something, and as I showed you, like the geopolitical risk is also increasing. But I'm not thinking the developed nations in near future, like in 4 years, 5 years, or 10 years, they are going to focus on small countries. It seems like they are going to be focused more on themselves, and they are thinking more about their fight with one larger country is thinking more about its fight with the other larger country. So they are thinking more about themselves rather than the small countries, and that's sad. And we are not we are not listening any strong voice from any larger countries that they need a rule-based world order. So that's sad. But with compared to the larger countries or blocs, still European Union, we have some hope from it. But the problem is that the European Union is still struggling to readjust itself. And the Fatma question is that when considering economic factors purely, there exist a few problems. One of the change of the regional economic integration is market asymmetry. India has a market of 1.4 billion with a competitive manufacturing and agriculture base, virtually self-sufficient as compared to the other. Yeah, Fatma, that's also true, and that's the main reason, because the India doesn't consider itself equal to the other countries in the region, because India feel like, okay, I'm 80 to 90%, 80 to 85%, I am the South Asia. And according to some Indian, it's like South Asia has been part of the India. So they consider it like they're the small, you can say the countries, and India is the more powerful. So India consider it South Asia. That's also the problem. And as I told you, the larger countries are not thinking about they need the smaller countries in that way. So the similar India is thinking, and that's the problem for South Asian integration. But it's not only the India, the other smaller countries. Historically, they've been looking around rather than South Asia as well. Pakistan has been more focused on Central Asia and also the Middle East, and Nepal was trying to be part of South Asia as well, and they were also looking at China and some other sources of the funds and also the markets. So nobody in the region has been very much focused on the regional integration and the South Asian region. So that has also been a problem.
Thank you so much. I think that brings us to the end of the Q&A, and just want to thank all the participants for joining in the discussion. So to present the concluding remarks is Ambassador Hayam Akbar, who held various positions in Pakistan's foreign service, including ambassador to Spain and Andorra, as well as the permanent representative to the UN World Tourism Organization. Besides coordinating PRISA's advisory council, Ambassador Akbar also serves as the CEO of Mortronica Solutions, focusing on skills development in emerging technologies like robotics and artificial intelligence. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mary Hunter. And indeed, it was a pleasure for me to be part of this webinar and to listen to some very well-researched, well-articulated, and a valuable explanation of the topic which was under consideration by us today. Dr. Zeeshan Hashim has done a very good job and has made us all richer in our thoughts on the topic. He definitely touched upon all the relevant themes related to the topic, including the historical evolution of the geopolitics and the global order which we have witnessed in the past, and as we see the contemporary manifestations of this changing global order, as well as how this order has provided challenges and opportunities for the developing countries, including the positives and negatives for the developing countries by the globalization movement, including for the South Asian countries also. I'm sure that this treatise, this presentation really would help us enhance the debate, and we move towards searching for more equitable, more reasonable, and more equal world order in the coming times, despite the facts that the current political developments, current movements on the geopolitical scenes on the globe are really not very positive in one's eyes. From my perspective, I'd like to say that we must acknowledge that geopolitical forces directly shape the realities of small and developing countries as they influence the excess of their resources, as they influence the trade of these countries, security and international norms of these countries. So they do create systemic disadvantages for the developing countries, and hence severely limiting their decision making as well as their progress. Dr. Zeeshan has suggested some way outs, some solutions. I believe these are important elements to be considered, and these can make developing countries and the developed world come together to find some solutions for a better global order of tomorrow. I believe that developing countries are pretty resilient nations. They do lack in resources, but they have the capacity to, if they could get together, they can influence the movements of the global order in an impactful way. We do witness, we have seen that there have been some movements on South-South cooperation. We have seen some technological advancements. We have seen some push for the multilateral world order, but things are still not at their, they are pretty far from their end, and we think that the current unequal global order can be changed if we continue to have a proactive dialogue and engagement between the developed and the developing ones. The international community will have to understand that developing countries should be given spaces and should be given the multilateralism, genuine multilateralism has to be brought in place, and there should be efforts to address the historical injustices and also towards ensuring equitable participations of all nations. I'm confident that today's presentation of Dr. Zeeshan Hashim has, as well as the contributions by the distinguished participants of the webinar, has inspired us to think towards a more enhanced movement towards a equitable global order. It will be a long and challenging journey, but some steps should always be taken before the journey begins. So I thank you on behalf of PRISA, Dr. Hashim, Dr. Zeeshan Hashim, for this enriching and thought-provoking webinar, and thanks to all the participants for giving their valuable time and for sharing their thoughts and perspectives on the geopolitics and inequality as for the developing countries also, as well as in overall economic and regional integration terms. Thanks a lot. So kind of you, and hope to see in another webinar soon by some of our distinguished guests of PRISA. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you again to everyone for participating. As the ambassador mentioned, we hope to see you again at our future webinars that PRISA will be hosting. And just on a final note, I'd like to wish anyone who's observing Ramadan at the moment a happy Ramadan Mubarak, and soon to be Eid Mubarak as well. And thank you especially to Dr. Zeeshan for taking the time to inform us on this important subject today. Thank you.
You're welcome.